Kelvin och Klingon, Kelvin och Pongwij. My name is Kelvin. I am one of the co-presenters with Philip. So I'm not sure if I'm really count as a Trekkie, but I've been aware of Klingon for a while and started actually studying it for the past couple of years. And thus decided, since I've been to this Polyglot conference a number of times, why not talk about it here? And yeah, that's basically my story.
I've been involved in languages for quite a while. As a polyglot, and I'm probably also one of the comparatively few people who came to the Klingon language from the linguistic angle. It's an interesting language to learn, rather than from the cultural angle. Oh, I love Star Trek and the Klingons, and I know everything about them, let's learn their language. I actually know comparatively little about Star Trek, which is always funny when we are at a Klingon meeting, such as the annual one in Germany, and somebody says, oh, remember that scene where so-and-so said what and what, and I have no idea, I haven't seen that. What? But that's where the Klingon word X was coined for. I don't know, I just learned that X means Y. I don't know what a Y is. It's some piece of Star Trek technology. So we're going to give you a view anyway into the language predominantly, with a couple of cultural notes along the way as they pertain to the language.
Okay, so to start off, a little bit of background on Klingon. So Star Trek started out as a TV series. Presumably, the majority of you have seen a little bit of it, or at least know about it. At one point, they decided they started making movies, and for one of the movies, a few words of Klingon were developed by one of the actors, James Doohan, the person who plays Scotty, if you're familiar with the characters. These words really didn't make up a language of any sort. They were just gibberish that was used when there were Klingon characters on screen to make it look a little bit more like they weren't just speaking English amongst themselves. But at any rate, they liked that idea enough that later on they hired an actual linguist, Dr. Marc Okrand, and they had him flesh out the language to be an actual language that you can learn. Eventually, Marc, and in coordination with Paramount, published a dictionary of Klingon. This was in 1985. It was meant as sort of a gimmick of sorts. They didn't really expect anyone to do much with it other than to go and maybe learn a phrase or two, learn to say nuknech or kapla or something like that, and then go and impress your friends by knowing a word of Klingon and having the Klingon dictionary on your shelf. However, they underestimated the nerdiness of Star Trek fans and polyglots and linguists. And people bought the book and decided to actually learn the language. Knowing this, eventually there was a second, this isn't actually on the slide, but there was a second printing of the book with some additional vocabulary and grammar, and there have been a few more books, all also by Marc Okrand, with more information and more words and stuff. And Marc is still actively developing the language to this day, and will at Klingon Qepme will come and release a few to a few dozen words, depending on how lucky we get. Actually, for what it's worth, this scarf comes from such a meetup. There's one in Germany. We'll talk about. I'll mention those at the end. Please.
One thing that you may notice if you've ever seen written Klingon is that it's got a very bumpy appearance, because there are capital letters and lowercase letters seemingly scattered all over the place. The Klingon orthography is case sensitive, meaning that some letters are always uppercase, such as H or D or S. Some letters are always lowercase, such as T or P or U. This was originally intended as an aid for the actors when they were making the screenplay. The capital letters are basically those which have a sound that you wouldn't normally associate with that letter in English. For instance, a capital I is not an E sound, but an I. And capital S is not a S sound, but a Sh. And this orthography, which was originally just a temporary thing for the actors, was later used in the publication of this gimmick, the Klingon dictionary, which then became the basis for lots of people who learned the language and is now the official spelling system. So if you write Klingon, you'll have to use this capital and lowercase thing. If you try to write a lowercase I, for instance, so that it doesn't get confused with a lowercase l, it will look weird to an experienced Klingonist and may even be nearly unreadable. Klingon was deliberately made to be as unfamiliar as possible, perhaps from any existing major known Earth language, while not being so alien that it couldn't be learned by humans. So it has many sounds which are unusual from the point of view of an English speaker, such as a uvular q or a retroflex sh or d. There are interesting holes in the phonology, so the sounds of Klingon are not as symmetrically arranged as they are in most natural languages. The word order is unusual as well. There are 6 possible combinations in which you can arrange the subject, the verb, and the object. So you can have subject, verb, object, subject, or whatever. They all occur in some languages of the world, but the rarest of them all is object, verb, and then subject. And that is what Klingon has. It also has no adjectives distinct from verbs, which is something unusual for English speakers. It does happen in some other languages. No relative pronouns. There's no word for that or which. Instead, you mark it on the verb, which means you can only relativize the subject or the object, which is, okay, kind of technical. But yeah, basically Klingon was supposed to be very different, but not so different that it's completely alien and unlearnable.
Okay, so some notes on Klingon culture, which are definitely relevant if you want to speak the language idiomatically. Klingons are extremely direct. They just don't really care about the pleasantries that most human cultures put a lot of weight on. So it's basically impossible to actually translate hello or thank you or please into Klingon. If you look up how to say hello in Klingon on the internet, you will get the word nuknech, but that really just means, what do you want? It's not really a translation of hello, it's just the thing you're sort of most likely to hear if you walk up to a Klingon and try to talk to them. It's like also not entirely grammatical. It's a fixed expression. Klingons pretty much just say what they need to say. They don't sugarcoat. They don't beat around the bush. They don't say, "Could you hand me that?" They just say, "Give me the blood wine. Give me my batleth." And there's another term that's frequently mistranslated as a greeting is kaplat. It is often mistranslated as goodbye, but it really is a noun meaning success. And Klingons often will say kaplat when they're parting because, say you've just given someone an order and they're going off to go conquer the Cardassian Empire or something, and you want to wish them success because you would actually like to see the Cardassians conquered. You're not saying goodbye. It's not that you need to say something when a person is walking away from you. You're just wishing them well because in this situation you do actually care about the results of the mission. And last but not least, there is a concept called curse warfare, muqagvesh. This is sort of just a game among Klingons where when they're out drinking and sparring and whatever, they will they will start insulting each other and try to one-up each other with the most insulting thing they can think of. Sort of, they might tell somebody, you're a waste of perfectly good energy. If you call somebody life support in Klingon, that sort of implies that they can't take care of themselves in a fight. And so, those sorts of things. They'll compete to see who can insult each other the most. And it's not really about actually attacking the other person. It's just sort of a game.
So these are the consonant sounds of Klingon. Not something that you have to memorize, just a quick overview where you see, that some of the letters are capitalized, such as the D and the S. Some are lowercase, such as the P and the B. You don't have anything in this box next to the T. You don't have anything in this box over the D. And some Klingon letters are made up of several letters, such as TLH or NG are considered one letter in Klingon. And the vowels is a bit more standard. You have 5 vowels, but the front vowels are lax. You actually have I and E rather than E and E, as you would expect in a perfectly symmetrical vowel triangle. And the phonology, you have all syllables must start with a consonant followed by a vowel. You can't have a syllable that just starts with a vowel. And the consonant and the syllable can end with a consonant, which is the most common. There may be no consonant after the vowel, or one of the clusters, w and glottal stop, y glottal stop, and r. And yeah, you can't have w after o or u.
So, typology and syntax. Klingon, as we mentioned before, is object, verb, subject. So, yash chop targ, officer bites targ, does not in fact mean the officer bites the targ, but rather the targ bites the officer. It's also pro-drop, which if you speak Spanish or Greek, you're already familiar with this. It just means that you can, although in Klingon, it means that you can drop a pronoun when the information carried by the pronoun is indicated on the verb. In Klingon, you can do this with both subjects and objects, but it's the same thing as what you'd be familiar with already if you speak Spanish. So yeah, yash chop can just mean is enough to mean it bites the officer. Chop on its own can mean he bites her, or it bites him, or it bites them. Klingon doesn't really have tense as a grammatical category, but it does have several affixes marking aspect. So for instance, cher would mean he or she dies, but chertach would mean he or she is in the process of dying. Cherpu means she or he has died, but however, keep in mind that since tense is not marked, cherpu can also mean she or he will have died, or even just will die. The salient part is that the action is viewed as being completed. It's not as compared to, say, how do you do that?
It's above the arrow keys.
Oh yeah, as compared to chertach, where it's sort of like she is dying in English. You're paying attention to the action as something continuous and ongoing. And so Klingon does not have adjectives as a distinct class, but instead it has some stative verbs which can be used sort of like adjectives. Since Klingon is object, verb, subject, if you put a stative verb before a noun, then the noun is interpreted as the subject of that verb. For instance, Vang Tin, the big city. Vang means city, sorry, I got that backwards. Tin Vang means the city is big. Tin means to be big. Vang means city. However, if you put the stative verb after the noun, it is interpreted as an adjective. So Vang Tin means the big city, literally city big.
You have plurals which are formed by suffixes on nouns, and there are three different kinds of suffixes, three different kinds of plural suffixes, depending on whether a noun is something capable of speech, such as a child, a human, a woman, your cousin, or whatever, or whether it's a body part, or anything else. So there is a suffix pu, which is, pu, which is used for beings capable of speech. Nuv turns into nuv pu. Du, which is for body parts. Tlon becomes tlon du. And me is the most general plural suffix, which is used on pretty much all nouns that aren't in one of these two fairly narrow groups, duj, duj, me. And if you do use the me suffix on something else, then it gives the idea of something scattered all around. For instance, if you say puk pu, that's just children in general. But if you'd say in the room there are puk me, then the kids are all over the place. Some nouns don't actually take a plural suffix, but turn into something separate, something irregular in the plural, such as dosh becomes rai, jengva becomes ngop. I sometimes think of this as something similar to what happens in German with collective nouns such as Geschirr as the plural of maybe Teller. So plates has a sort of collective noun which refers to plates in general as a whole, but has a singular format, or furniture, which is lots of chairs together.
Yeah, so let's go and look at verbs. Klingon verbs inflect for both subject and object, so you get this big table of lots and lots of prefixes, which is kind of scary. But do we really need to learn all of them at once? Thankfully, not really. So if you're just starting off with Klingon, you want to dive right in, you've just come to a kep, and you want to dive in and start talking to people. You really only need 6 of the prefixes. It might be worth learning 1 or 2 more, but you can definitely get by with these in a typical conversation. That's I do something to him, her, or them. I do something intransitively. Da, you do something to he, her, it, or them. Be, you do something intransitively. Null prefix covers most third-person cases if the object is also third person. And ye is the singular imperative.
Verbs also can have a fairly wide variety of suffixes covering all sorts of things. There are 10 different kinds of suffixes, and they have to be arranged in a certain order for it to be grammatical. One exception is suffixes such as be, which are known as rovers, which can occur after pretty much any suffix and can negate the meaning of that suffix. For instance, 2 rows further down, we have lach, which is to be able. So you can distinguish, for instance, shop be lach, I am able to not eat, shop is eat, or shop lach be, I am not able to eat. So depending on whether you want to negate the verb itself or the suffix that it comes after. You have a suffix for causative, which is something that some languages have. They have a productive causative where you can do something such as the causative of to eat is to cause somebody to eat, is to feed somebody. To cause a tree to fall is to fell it. To cause something to lie down is to lay it somewhere. Klingon can do this to all verbs. For those who know Esperanto, it's basically the igi. Some verbs, some suffixes which don't show up in languages such as English are evidential-like things such as lao and bej, which you can use to indicate how sure you are that a certain action happens. You might say, for instance, that man is apparently eating, or the man is definitely eating. And some syntactical suffixes, such as de as soon as, where English might use a conjunction, Klingon marks it on the verb. A which is a question marker which goes on the verb, or wi, which turns a verb into a noun, indicating either a thing which does something or a person who does something, basically like ER in English. Like a singer is somebody who sings. In Klingon it would be a boom wit, is somebody who does boom, who sings.
Okay. Nouns. So nouns don't take prefixes, but they also take a bunch of suffixes. Not nearly as many as verbs, but same idea. So we have may, which we showed you earlier, which is the sort of general plural suffix. But we also have some suffixes che and not, which indicate sort of how sure the speaker is that the noun they're using is the correct noun. So if you talk about that duj che that you saw, duj is a spaceship. A dujche is like an apparent ship. Say it's a blip on the radar screen, but you haven't confirmed it's actually a ship. Whereas a duj not, you've done all your scans and you know it is actually a ship and you should probably go to red alert. In this row, dodge, charge, are possessive markers. There are a bunch of other possessive markers as well, but we didn't want to put the full set on the slide. If you studied Arabic, you know what's going on there. Instead of having a separate possessive pronouns, Klingon indicates pronomial possessors with suffixes on the noun. In the same category are vek and vam, which mean that and this. They are demonstrative suffixes, but they're sort of grouped with the possessives. Because, I mean, it doesn't really make sense to say that his city. And finally, there are syntactic suffixes, such as dak, which is sort of a general allative locative. It can mean both motion towards or the place where you are located, at, on, towards, to, though not all meanings of to. It is not a dative. And mol, which basically translates as because of. It indicates that the noun is the reason for which something has happened.
Okay, next a bit on vocabulary. Klingon words tend to be monosyllabic, which requires perhaps a bit of suspension of disbelief that some fairly complicated concepts just happen to have just a single syllable in Klingon. For instance, I can't think of a good example right now, but perhaps duj, which is a spaceship, has a one-syllable sound in Klingon, or pu, which is a phaser, which is a fairly complex technological device. It is derived from an earlier word, which means something like the spike on the end of a boot, but even that is not something that I expect to be part of the basic vocabulary that merits a single syllable, like words such as salt or mum or dad. There are a few exceptions, especially in nouns. There are very few Klingon verbs of more than one syllable. There's ripdij, which means to court-martial. Nadev is a kind of, what would you call an adverb, I suppose, which means here, hereabouts. And khivje is a glass or a cup, anything to drink out of. There are a few nouns with more than two syllables, but they're fairly rare. So Klingon words, on average, well, Klingon root words tend to be fairly short. Because of the suffixes that you can add to them, they can sometimes be longer, but the roots are usually fairly short. Klingon vocabulary contains a lot of puns. Some say that those are good for helping you remember the words, some think that maybe they're overdone, but they are there. For instance, the word khed here means science. Can anybody figure out why that might be? Because of QED showing up in science, scientific proofs. Chod means the captain of a ship and comes from the English or American abbreviation HOD for head of department, somebody who's at the top of something. And some of them you need to know a bit of Klingons. There's a sort of meta pun. One of those is Rosh Rach, which means DNA, so the thing that our genetic material is made of. Now, Rosh in Klingon means to lick, and Rach is a pronoun which means he. So Rosh Rach means he licks. And DNA is a double helix. So that's the sort of thing you sometimes come across in Klingon. So there's perhaps a bit of fan service involved in creating some of these words. Because, yeah, Dr. Okrand has a fairly good relationship with the people learning the language. Historically, Klingon was made for the films, so it has a lot of words which were needed for the Star Trek films, or which were potentially needed for the Star Trek films, even if they didn't end up spoken on screen. So you have lots of words for technology and spaceships and honor and battle and that sort of thing, and was historically poor lots of things that we'd actually need to speak about on Earth. There were no words for street or table at the beginning, or car or air. Some of these gaps have been filled over the years. We do now have a word for street, we have a word for table, we have a word for air. But for instance, the word for air is fairly recent. I think it came in the last 3-ish years. So yeah, Klingon is getting fleshed out more and more, but the things you can speak about, especially in the early days, were rather one-center, were fairly narrow at some points.
Well, so here are a few more words, and then let's try out an actual sentence. So, sorry. Chol is language. Lao is one of those stative verbs we told you about earlier, meaning to be many, to be a lot. Jat is to speak. Kep is a meetup. And mach is the pronoun we, the first person plural pronoun. So, take a moment. Does anyone think they know what this sentence here, chol laut jakwit kapdak mach, might actually mean in Klingon? What did you say? Okay, I'm hearing it. I'm hearing the right answer. So it means we are at the Polyglot meetup, or we are at the Polyglot gathering. Somebody also said we meet to speak many languages, which is a good guess, but if you look at kep doc only goes on nouns, so kep has to be the noun meetup or meeting rather than the verb to meet. There is actually a verb to meet, and I believe it is also kep, but it has to be a noun here. So that's the end of our slides. If you have questions, this would be a good time to ask them. If you don't have questions, we can also do a few more sentences.
Or sing a song in Klingon.
Yes, that's also a good possibility.
Want to hear a song in Klingon?
Song
then questions?
Are you okay with waiting? All right, let's do the song. Sure.
Okay.
Koi kailish Polyglot, koi puchbet pu, rochborg matborg jeshuv wit, shite moch chut my ew, ma shuv manongej machoch chut nipetjen majach wolku, pat ma chech bej edjok kij dak valkut ma dim, pat rech ma shuftach kut ma mevkot ma shuftach ma ov.
Or
Are you asking about that specific song?
something like
So that is a song that you would have heard if you've seen all of Deep Space Nine, but I wouldn't call it widely known. I can go through and translate it if you guys would like. I'd also, sorry.
But basically the short version is, it's a kind of battle song.
Yeah. Yeah, it's their, it's saying we fight honorably, then we die and go join our ancestors off in the Black Fleet, which is the Klingon concept of Valhalla, where we never stop fighting. Okay, questions, you.
I noticed that in Klingon language it's very important how sure you are or how to decide, but not when it happens or when it will happen.
So, if you want to be Sapir-Whorfian, you could say that for Klingons it is very important to know if that blip on the radar is actually a ship, but maybe not so important to point out the fact that it's happening right now because we already know it's happening right now. But on the other hand, Klingon doesn't have morphologically marked tense. Like the verbs don't indicate future or past or present, but you can still tell someone when something happens. You can use an adverb saying tomorrow or today or 5 minutes ago. So it's not, you can definitely indicate when something occurs. It's just done a bit differently from the way English and most European languages do it. So the question was, Klingon has a lot of monosyllabic words. How does that affect, or how does that lead to a lot of homonyms and words with multiple meanings? There definitely are homonyms. I don't feel like I can estimate whether there are more than there are in English. Do you have an opinion on this?
My feeling is that there are quite a few cases where a certain syllable can be either a noun or a verb, which sometimes have a related meaning, sometimes a completely different meaning, but there are not all that many cases, not very many cases, I think, where a given syllable can have multiple meanings as a noun or multiple meanings as a verb. So it has managed to avoid a large degree of homonymy, partly because of its fairly small vocabulary, but in general, it's fairly clear as if you know whether it's a noun or a verb, what a given syllable means. Yeah?
Is there a Klingon Kepme in France?
The question is, are there any Klingon Kepme in France? I am not aware of any. The main ones I know of are the official Kepa of the Klingon Language Institution, which happens in America every year, and there is a Kepchom, which literally means a small meeting, but is now bigger than the official one in America for the past several years, which happens in Saarbrücken in Germany, which is close to France, but well, close to sort of southeastern France, which takes place every year in around November. There may be small local meetups in other places that I don't know, but I think those are the only two big ones worldwide. So I'm not aware of any significant numbers of Klingonists in France or any meetups there.
It's worth pointing out, if anyone's interested, the Saarbrücken meetup is the next one is this coming November. I want to say it's in the middle of November, but I don't remember the exact date. Philip says the 16th to the 19th, but you can also Google for, if you Google Kepchom, Q-E-P-H-O-M, I'm sure you will find information on it. And also the Kep-A is going to be in Chicago in the US, and that will be late-ish July. I believe July 21st to 23rd, if I remember correctly. I may be off by a couple of days.
I heard a while ago there was a lawsuit where Marc Okrand was trying to own the language, and it was ruled that you can't own a language even though he created it. I'm curious, what are the ramifications of it as far as its evolution and purity and consistency within the fan base and people who might be intruding on it?
As I understood it, the lawsuit was actually about a film Axanar made by a group of fans, and Paramount wanted to assert their intellectual property on Klingons as a whole, and there was a brief, an amicus brief, bringing the language into the question, because this is a question that many fans have asked about in the past. Does Paramount really own the language, and if so, what does that mean? Do they just own copyright to the dictionary, meaning you can't copy the dictionary as a whole book? Does it mean they own the words and you're not allowed to write any sentence? But as far as I know, the lawsuit explicitly declined to rule on this question on whether Paramount has a copyright claim on the language itself, because that question was not determined to be material for the decision of whether the film infringed the rights of Paramount in general. So as far as I know, we do not have an answer on who owns what rights to the language or who's allowed to do what with it, which is why some fan works are a bit careful, especially collections of words. I think we haven't got a definitive answer. Do you know more about it?
I don't really know anything that Philip didn't already say. Other than that, from the conlang side of it, there was a brief filed in the case by the Language Creation Society, which is indeed a real thing, and I am a member of it, pointing out, sort of going against languages being ownable, but I don't think there was ever, it was dropped from the case. I don't think there's ever been an actual decision made. So the question was, what sort of number or counting system does Klingon have? That's actually a pretty cool topic. So modern Klingon, what you would learn if you look at the Klingon dictionary, uses a base 10 system that isn't that different from European languages. I think we probably shouldn't list off the numbers right now just because we don't have that much time, but yeah, Philip is actually writing a number down right at the moment. 123 is literally 100, 2, 10, 3. So, wat, vak, chop, mach, wedge. Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. However, if you dig a little deeper, you learn that Klingon originally had a base 3 number system. And so the original numbers were wat, chot, and wedge, 1, 2, and 3. And then later, I've forgotten the exact, there may be more detail to this, but later the Klingons, this is the fictional history, is that the Klingons went and encountered other races that all seemed to use base 10, and so they started using a base 10 system, and the rest of the numbers up through 8, I believe, come from their names for musical notes, the Klingon equivalent of solfege.
The question is, do you think that Klingons are a metaphor for a kind of population that really exists here on the Earth? And the answer for me is, I have no idea.
So the person asking the question then mentions that they were thinking of Vikings. I'm not, I have not personally, so I've heard some people say that maybe they're a little bit racist or something like that, but I don't know that much about that per se. I do know that the Klingon governmental structure, to a certain extent, I believe is based on feudal Japan. Don't quote me on that. That's not something I did research on for the talk, but.
My perception about this one, maybe yours or the history of the movie and the book is different.
Yeah. Yeah, I have definitely seen people say that they feel Klingons are sort of what happens when it becomes socially unacceptable to depict Mongolians or black people or other very particular races in stereotyped ways. And thus the stereotypes get moved to alien species. But I'm not by any means an expert on that topic.
I just can confirm the feudal Japan. I was at one talk when the person really compared the structure of the society based on honor, like of Klingons to the feudal Japan with children.
So another commenter just said that they can confirm that Klingon society is based on feudal Japan. So I'm now much more confident that I'm remembering correctly.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
Sure. Was wondering, I thought I remembered, back to the languages, I thought I remembered the script,
Picard.
Is that something that you want to give a couple of minutes, just really quickly talk about the script?
So we don't have that much time. We can write a couple of characters if you want. Well, sorry.
I don't know what's the one by heart. That's and that's
So, yeah, neither of us knows Picard, and in the Klingon community, very few people actually use it. For the most part, it's just some people may learn it for fun, but other than that, it's sort of everyone writes Klingon using the Latin alphabet. So I believe at one point there was Unicode. The Unicode Consortium actually refused to add Picard because, yes, there are actual Klingon speakers, but they never actually use it.
Yeah, that's what I heard as well, that people don't actually use it in communicate, even the Klingon speakers themselves don't use it, so it doesn't have to be written down or organized in Unicode. It does exist for decorative purposes. It used to be just a fan thing, and it wasn't clear whether it was official at all. Now it seems to be a bit more official, that it is that the symbols that we do use may actually have been used by Klingons in the fictional universe, but yeah, use of it is not very great. But yeah, that brings us to the end. Thank you very much. No.
Well, thanks for coming. Klapla.